Thanks so very much for coming back to another Sunday school class. Thanks to all those who are online with us. Thanks for all those who are here. Today we are continuing in Daniel chapter 7. I imagine we'll also begin Daniel chapter 8 today. We find ourselves in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. We're thinking about this in two perspectives, and it's hard to not think about both at the same time. But our attempt is to see this passage in its historical context before thinking about what it means in the future. Okay? So right now we're talking about what Antiochus IV did, and we're taking a look at this from that historical perspective. So could I have one person please start us off by reading Daniel chapter 7, verses 23 through 27. Daniel chapter 7, verses 23 through 27.
The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings, who shall arise from the kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and times, and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion, and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven, shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So last time we talked about some of the historicity of what's going on here with this fourth kingdom. We mentioned 2 different perspectives that people have about verse 25. Specifically, the blasphemy, the wearing out of the saints, right? A long persecution. What it meant to change the times in the law, and what it means in 2 different perspectives. We had one perspective from Joyce Baldwin, which said that change in the times and the law meant changing and having a new table of religious festivals, right? Changing the times, changing how things are calculated, all right? And then the second way of thinking about that is changing the law, meaning a new morality, having a new morality imposed. So that was one perspective from Joyce Baldwin. The other perspective then was considering John Goldingay, and he simply says, enforcing his way to the throne and bulldozing his way through history, Antiochus has defied the shaping of history otherwise laid out. So he would simply say, look, this is kind of more metaphorical language than what's actually happening. Now both can actually be true. Antiochus tried to implement new religious festivals, specifically those of the Gentiles. He also looked to change the law in some regards, and so both of those things were true, but perhaps not as extravagant as as sometimes we like to think about that. So that's where we were. What questions do you have or insights did you have about where we were before we move into a time, times, and a half a time?
This also refer to the tribulation that's to come yet?
Could this also refer to the place where the tribulation yet to come? I want to save that as much as possible, and I want to talk about that afterwards. I think, yes, you're correct. This could be referring to a tribulation yet to come. But I also want to try to knock it out in its historical context first. Yep. Questions or comments? All right, time times and half time has also been calculated two different ways, right? Sometimes people think that's about 3.5 years, something like that. Other time, and specifically what Golden Gate says, is simply metaphorical. It's time threatened to extend itself longer, but the anticipated sequence breaks off. You have time, times, in the sequence, then you're expecting more times. Instead, it drags back to half a time. It's something that's cut off all of a sudden at the middle. Okay? What that means, again, the persecution will not go on forever. There's going to be a limit to it. Okay? There'll be a limit to the reign of this person.
42 months is mentioned several times in Revelation. So that would be 3.5 years.
Yeah, the term 42 months is mentioned often in Revelation. That would be 3.5 years. I'm going to ballpark that one again because that's going to be how Revelation utilizes the text of Daniel. And so we want to focus on here first. By the way, the Bible study crew on Wednesday nights is thinking and praying about doing Revelation as our next book. So if you want more on Revelation and to discuss that, Daniel and Revelation have to be taken together. So this course is almost like a prerequisite for that Bible study when that starts. So that'll be pretty interesting for us. All right, let's take a look in verse 26 and 27 then. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. What does that mean? It means when God shows up, the court sits down in judgment, and the offending horn, the offending kingdom, will be brought to a sudden end. Right? There is no lengthy battle. God has the judgment, and things are done. Okay? John Golden Gay says this: as soon as the Ancient of Days arrives, judgment is settled. There is no long, lengthy battle, and judgment denotes the exercise of authority by a person of power who is in a position to make and impose decisions, put down forces of disorder, and thus support and, if necessary, restore order in the world and in society. Okay? So the image here is God walks on the scene, ends the rule. Now we have to think about that both historically and in a future way. We're going to hold on to the future way. Historically, Antiochus' reign does come to a pretty sudden end. I mean, he gets killed off. Then the Hasmoneans come in, I believe, and they reestablish the Israeli kingdom. Okay, they reestablish a geopolitical kingdom of Israel until Rome comes in. Remember, we talk about stuff that's Greco-Roman. It's because Rome assimilated a lot of Greek culture into what they do. But the Greek Empire came first. Then Rome goes and conquers Greece, and then conquers almost all of their old territory. Okay, except for stuff down near India. Okay, so that's how that kind of works historically. Questions or comments?
Well, historically, how does that fit with the court will sit? Was the court seated and things were destroyed, or is that yet to happen historically?
Yeah.
Because certainly Antiochus didn't go down without a fight.
Mhm.
As other kingdoms came in, certainly there was would have been resistance, would have been
Sure.
battles.
Yeah. My answer is going to be it's both. We're gonna save the future stuff for just a moment. The language of the court sitting and judgment being enacted is something that can happen within history, and it does not have to wait to the end, right? The end can indicate several different things throughout the Old Testament scriptures. So it can be a future all the way at the end, but it could also just be at the end of an age, end of a kingdom, end of a line of rule. That could also be the end. And so that's kind of what we would be seeing here. Yep. Another place where something like this would happen would be if we take a very quick look in 1 Kings. Nope, I'm in 2 Kings. First Kings chapter 22. We're starting in verse 19. Let me just give the backstory. It's time for King Ahab to die. King Ahab is the current ruler in this place in 1 Kings 22. It's the current ruler of northern Israel. Very wicked king. His queen is Queen Jezebel. So that should ring a bell. Queen Jezebel is almost better known than King Ahab, right? But King Ahab is on the throne. It's time for his throne to end. Micaiah is the prophet of the day who's going to be coming in and prophesying to the king, actually to both king of northern Israel and to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. They're kind of allied at this time. And he says this, and Micaiah said, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right and on his left." That's his court. Remember, a court does not have to indicate just a judge with two attorneys and a defendant. What's the other one? A plaintiff? Right? And a plaintiff. That's not necessarily a court. A court is where the king stands, where all of his courtiers, all of his people are out before him. Right? Remember, we're in the ancient times. So here we have the Lord sitting on his throne in his court, and all of the angelic beings, all the host of heaven, standing on his right and on his left. And he says this, "Who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" The Lord's asking his heavenly court a question. How are we going to go about this? The end is already known. Ahab is going to die. But the Lord is asking his spiritual agents, how should we go about it? Okay, take a look at the text. One said one thing and another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, "I will entice him." And the Lord said to him, "By what means?" And he said, "I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And he says, "You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so." Now, therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster for you. And disaster indeed happens for King Ahab, right? So you have this court scene. The word court isn't used, but you have this court scene. And spiritual agents are coming up before him, and then the plan is executed, right? And that happens in the middle of history. You have something then similarly happening in Daniel 7 from a historical standpoint. If we're looking back from today, when the court sits, it's sitting there to make an end of a current king, not necessarily bring about the end of the world. Okay, so and we'll talk about the future stuff. But as we're reading, that sort of stuff also happens throughout history. What questions or comments do you have for me? First, what questions do you have about First Kings? And then what questions do you have as we bring that forward as an example for Daniel?
It's interesting that the Lord sent a lying spirit.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Lord sent a lying spirit, right? Yep.
And he put the lying spirit in all of them.
In all the prophets, yep, except for Micaiah. Yep. If you read through that story, I think there's what? Let me just double check here. There's a bunch of prophets that get tricked.
Are these good prophets?
Well, here's the thing. Question is they good? Or are they good prophets? And were they good prophets before then? We know that there were a lot of false prophets in the day. If a false prophet makes one false prediction, they are to be executed according to the Deuteronomy law. The Lord is the driving force behind these false predictions. But the Lord himself is not doing it. He's sending someone else to do it. Right? So all of that's really interesting. Let me see here. Yeah, it's 400. Look in 1 Kings 22, verse 6. Then the king of Israel gathered all the prophets together, about 400 men, said to them, "Shall I go up to battle against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" And they said, "Go up, for the Lord will give it into the hand of the king." Notice some very interesting things there. Number one, it's 400. How many prophets are executed on Mount Carmel by Elijah? Does anyone know offhand? I think so. I'm going to double check here. I think you're absolutely right. We're slightly off. In 1 Kings 18:22, Baal's prophets are 450 men. Right? So you have a bunch of prophets there of Baal. Here again, you're almost sort of seeing something very similar. You have 400 prophets. That's quite a prophetic crew there. Notice here, too, the language that's used in verse 6. It says, "And they said, 'Go up for the Lord.'" Notice that the Lord has only one capital letter, not all of them. That means actually the term Lord is used, not God's name. Remember, in our in our English Bibles, when God's proper name is used, the Lord is in all caps. So, for example, compare 1 Kings 22, verses 6. "Go up, for the Lord will give it into their hand." You see, Lord is one capital letter. Then look over at verse 20, 21, 22, 23. What do you see? All capitals. It should be all capitals there. Lord is all caps. That indicates God's proper name. Okay? So there's a difference even there. Which Lord are we talking about? Right? Micaiah is clearly talking about Yahweh. Who are the false prophets talking about? Probably Baal. Right? Maybe. Okay? Yeah. So there's some interesting things going on there. Does that help to answer the question, were these prophets evil? Every false prophet's going to be evil, and these ones are definitely false.
It's interesting that this one guy hit the prophet and slapped him in the face. So he must be knew he wasn't a true prophet. Or
Well, now wait a second. Let's take a look here very closely. Verse 24. 1 Kings chapter 22, verse 24. "Then Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek." That's one of the false prophets. that strikes the true prophet on the cheek.
Oh, no, wait. Oh, that guy is a true.
It's the Zedekiah is one of the false prophets.
Yeah, that's-
Micaiah is the true prophet. Zechariah strikes Micaiah on the cheek. Notice what the true prophet there does. The true prophet does not strike back. The true prophet, in verse 25, simply gives a true prophecy about Zedekiah's death, most likely. 1 Kings 22:24. Then Zedekiah, the son of the man I can't pronounce, came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, "How did the Spirit of the Lord go from me to speak to you?" Zedekiah thinks he's a true prophet. And he's not. He's a false prophet. He strikes Micaiah, the true prophet, and Micaiah just gives a prophecy back. Look at this. Micaiah says, "Behold, you shall see on that day when you go into an inner chamber to hide yourself." Oops. Zedekiah is going to be in trouble sometime. We don't know exactly what. We're never told exactly what. But Micaiah is the true prophet. Okay? Very good. So what questions or comments do we have there? Remember, the main idea of going on that little adventure was just to understand the point that God's court can be in session before the end of history. One more time. God's court can be in session before the end of history, and God's court may indeed decree an end, but it may not be the end. Okay? There's a little bit of a difference there. Now let's take all of that we've got and go back into Daniel 7 and see how this actually plays out. Because in verse 26, it seems to be very clear that it's still historical. And we get to verse 27. "And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." Huh. Now what do we think of that?
God wins.
Yeah, God wins. Right? The "and" seems to connect it right back to verse 25. First word should be "and." "And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." Now what's kind of weird about that?
Always talking about the end time.
Sounds like it's not talking about an end, but the end. Now wait a second. We were able to go through this all historically very, very well. All makes sense, lines up with Antiochus IV. Then we stumble into verse 27. And seems to make us want to go back to the beginning and interpret it all again in light of the end, not an end. Fascinating. Right? This is why I was saying let's go through the history, because there is a lot of history there. But then we also have to think about and talk about the future. Right? Both are present. Daniel, we know, is a true prophet. And so if the prophecy is to become true, what we would have expected after Antiochus would have been the kingdom and the greatness of kingdoms, all to be given to the saints of the Most High, to be an everlasting kingdom. All dominions shall serve and obey him. Right? That's what we should be seeing. Does that happen right after Antiochus' death? The obvious historical answer is no. Why? Rome comes. Rome comes. Okay? And they're never, the ancient Israelite people are never out of Rome's thumb. The Romans destroy the temple in AD 70. They then destroy Jerusalem and exile everyone, scattering the Jews all over the place in AD 135. Okay? No more Israel. Okay? So, for Daniel to be a true prophet, then, we have to then go back and begin to say, all right, all of this spoke directly into the time that Daniel was speaking to. It really is about Antiochus, but it's something more. But it's also something more. And what then we see then is that Antiochus IV becomes a type. You want to see what the Antichrist looks like, you look at Antiochus IV. And you go, all right, when the Antichrist comes, he's going to look something like Antiochus IV. Right? When the end comes, it's going to come something like what we see here. Okay? Questions or comments about that theoretically before we start to go back through?
A number of years ago, I had the privilege of spending an evening with a man from the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and he said Hebrew thinking is much different than Western thinking. You in the West think linear. You start at the beginning, you go through the story as it happened. You're not so in Hebrew teaching. They may start in the middle, they may go forward a way, and then they may go back. So is that what we're having here?
Yeah. So Wes's comment is that he spent some time, I'm just going to repeat and make sure people heard you. He spent some time with the man from the Middle East. Hebraic thinking is different than Western thinking. Again, remember the texts that we're dealing with are 2,550 years old, halfway across the world, in a very different region, in a very different climate, in a very different culture than we are. And what Wes is saying is sometimes in Hebraic teaching, what they'll do is they'll start in the middle, and they can go forward or backwards at freedom. And so Wes' comment is, isn't that what we're seeing here? I would say, yeah, something like that. I would almost argue a little bit more that what we're seeing is almost a spiral. We're starting in the middle. We spiral forward a little ways, because remember, Antiochus IV is not in the time of Daniel. He's several hundred years after Daniel. So we're spinning forward, but then we need to loop around almost in a circle and come even further out forward. Right? So it's a spiral shape. Okay? That's just my opinion. I mean, we can have different opinions. That's all right. Questions, comments? Brains are fried. You need to save brain space for the sermon today. We're going to need it. All right? How are we doing? All right, so now let's go back through. We're going to save how Revelation uses Daniel for that Bible study. I did not do an in-depth Revelation study for today. Revelation is going to pick up on many themes of Daniel and pull them out and use them in its own way. So, for example, in Daniel 7, we have 4 beasts. Let's take a look and see, just as a skim, what we find in Revelation. So let's head to Revelation. We're going to start in Revelation chapter 12. And we're going to be like while we go through Revelation, we're going to be like a rock skipping on the pond. We're not going to sink down to the depth. We're just going to be like a rock skipping on the top throughout. Revelation 12, one of the things that we encounter is the dragon. Okay? The dragon is named in verse 9. Can anyone read for me Revelation 12:9, please?
And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which received the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
Excellent, thank you. So the dragon, there is a dragon, and this dragon is named Satan, deceiver of the whole world. Does this have to be something we see or not?
If you're deceived, how can you see it?
If we're deceived, how can we see it? Exactly. That's number one. That's absolutely true. Right? Remember what we said from 2 Thessalonians 2 last week. Did we do it here? No, we did it in Bible study. I'm sorry. I don't want to go there right now. So you just remember that there's going to be a great deception. So if you're deceived, how can you see it? That's number one. Number two, remember the scenes that we're seeing in Revelation 12, verses 7 through 7 through 9, are things that happen in heaven, not things seen. Then he is thrown to earth, and Christians will conquer by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives unto death, in verse 11. Nothing indicates that we will see a literal dragon, a literal physical dragon. Satan is something spiritual, okay, that then happens and things then happen in real time. Go ahead.
But it's worked out through a man.
Yeah, it's going to be worked out through a man. Yep. And let's move in that direction because we're going to see that. I would like us to read all of Revelation 13. So could I have one person please read Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. Anybody volunteering for that for me? Thank you. And a second person, 11 through 18 for us, please. Thank you. Appreciate it. Alrighty, first one, please.
The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" And the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name in his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, and the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity, they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Lord, that's a lot.
It is. Thank you. And second.
Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lion, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercised all authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that he could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So here we see some obvious comparisons, right, between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. We see the imagery of beasts coming forward. How deep does it go? What does John use differently? Let me say, how does God use some of that imagery differently for the revelation he gives to John in light of the end that's different than Daniel 7? So let's take a look. Number 1, Revelation chapter 13, verse 1. Where does the beast rise out of? The sea. Remember very early in Daniel 7 we talked about the sea, because that's where in the dream the 4 beasts all come out of. What did the sea mean?
Humanity.
Yeah, humanity. It means the mass of chaotic structures and people of humanity. That's what it means. It does not literally mean that you will see a beast coming up on the coast of Africa, right? Have CNN train their eyes on all the coasts. No, it's just out of the mass of humanity. It's out of the stuff of humanity these things come. What was a beast in Daniel 7? What did it usually indicate? Very generally.
Evil.
Yeah, more or less. 3 of them weren't necessarily evil. The 4th is definitely evil. Even more general than that, they were simply kingdoms. Right? There were kingdoms, sometimes even kings, but a king always goes with a kingdom, and a kingdom always goes with a king. Right? So these are kingdoms. Okay? So we're expecting to come out of the sea a kingdom. It says 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. What does that mean?
Ten kings.
Yeah, most likely 10 kings. That's why there's 10 crowns. What's fascinating is that there's only 7 heads. What mythological beast has more than 1 head? There's probably several, but there's one that I'm thinking of. It's very much like a dragon.
Leviathan.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Wasn't thinking that. Leviathan, yeah. Leviathan comes up out of the sea. I don't know what to do with that because that's not the direction I was going to go. We'll let that sit for a minute. Leviathan is absolutely correct, I think. And that would be the Hebraic ancient monster of chaos. Where I was going is into actually Greek mythology with the Hydra. Does anyone know what a Hydra is? Hydra is a big snake dragon-like beast with 3 heads. Cut off a head and it sprouts 2 more. Cut off another head and sprouts 2 more, right? And that would make then 7. Okay. We gotta have video game night here or something. We'll just play through some video games for y'all. but seriously, these images, we use them in video games and in modern day Hollywood thing. But those images are actually sometimes rooted in ancient Greek mythology. Anyone have grandchildren? Sit down and watch the cartoon version of Hercules sometime, right? all of a sudden you'll get a whole lot of that Greek mythology washing over you. Well, that's kind of some of the symbolism that's being pulled on in these different places, is creatures fantastical like that. And here's a beast, 7 heads, 10 diadems on its head. Okay, we're going to move on from there. What questions do you have? Now here's what's fascinating. Verse 2. The beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth is like a lion's. Now, hold your finger, or put your bulletin, better yet, put your bulletin in Revelation 13. Head back to Daniel 7. Right? Let's start in verse 6. Daniel 7, verse 6. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard. Move backwards to Daniel 5. And behold, another beast, the second one like a bear. Head back to verse 4. The first one was like a lion. Now flip back to Revelation, and what do you have? Combination. You got it. What does that mean? Most likely it doesn't mean that there's going to be some abomination of genetics coming out of the ocean. It's not meant to be literal. It means that the kingdom is going to have elements of these 3 other kingdoms. Elements of the Babylonians. Elements of the Greeks. Elements of thank you. Elements of Persia. I'm being helped along here. Thank you so much. Elements of Persia, all of those different things being the flavor of the culture and actions of this new kingdom. Being the flavor of the culture, the actions, the power of this new kingdom. Okay? What questions do you have for me?
I've heard it said that the lion stands for England, leopard Germany, and the bear Russia.
So one more time, so each of these characteristics, like leopard, bear, and lion, is given a modern day companion: England, Germany, and Russia. Maybe. The trick is how does that interplay with Daniel? And then what do we see in England, Germany, and Russia that would be similar to Babylon, Greece, and Persia? And so I think drawing those characteristics would be difficult. I think the one that gives me the most trouble about that one, just off the top of my head without study, is actually Germany. What symbol has Germany usually used? The eagle. Remember under the Nazis? It was actually the eagle. Okay, it was the Third Reich, the Third Kingdom. Okay, so that's just something to think about. That would trouble me there about that comparison. Off the top of my head without study, though. So I'm not saying that that's what it has to be. All right, very good. So what is fascinating then, continuing on about verse 2? And to it, meaning that kingdom, that beast, those kings, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Fascinating. Okay, what does that mean for us? It's going to be a satanic kingdom. It's going to be a kingdom that maybe not on the face of things, but it works like Satan would have it. What power does Satan have?
of how much power God will allow him to have.
Yeah, how much power he's allowed to have.
But he was stripped at the cross.
Yeah, he's stripped of his power and thrown at the cross. So that makes this whole thing interesting. Wes is getting that from Colossians, chapter 1 or 2, somewhere in there. We're out of time, so I'm not going to look it up. I want to just gently say that if we're looking at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and the great deception, what comes to mind as Satan's power is lies. Satan was a deceiver from the beginning and a murderer from the beginning. And so we could almost imagine that this kingdom is going to be a kingdom of lies, right? Of great deception, underhandedness, murder, not things that are good or honorable or true. Okay. Now, when we put things like that, is it hard to think that that's actually far off? Not really. Not really. Right? All nations tend to end or tend to move and drift into that sort of direction. Right? Can catch all of our politicians, and I do mean most likely all of them, like 100%, in lies. Right? I mean, that's just the direction nations tend to take. Very good. So, I guess we're not out of Daniel 7 today. I'm sorry. We will continue this futuristic comparison a little bit next week and then hopefully get into Daniel chapter 8. Before we do that, any closing questions, comments, or remarks? Alrighty, thank you so much. We'll see you upstairs. Take some deep breaths, right? If we're overloaded. Take some deep breaths. That'll help clear the brain. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. See you upstairs.
Are there any prayer meetings this week?
No, I'm sorry. Yep, we